Hello and welcome to a Tolbert music tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about percussion, everything that you need to know as a beginner or the parent of a new beginner on this instrument. So one of the first things that you're going to notice is that we are down here on the floor. Most percussionists find this very intuitive, though I do see some trying to put this thing up on a table. We don't ever want to open it anywhere except on the floor. You can dent and scratch stuff with this big heavy case, and you're also putting it up to a height where the precious components inside of here can fall out onto the floor. And so since we're already down here, there's less height for things to fall, just in case any small mistakes do happen along the way. But hopefully with this little guide, we'll be able to get it opened up just right and put together without any difficulty. So let's go ahead and get things underway here. I do want to make a quick note of the fact that most of these have a handle that will allow, and wheels on the end down here that allow them to be moved around kind of like luggage. Now, this is probably looks better than it is. It's great when you're in a hallway and you got a long way to go, but you're still going to have to probably pull it up and down some stairs. If you have a young student who is small and has difficulty with this, at all of our schools we should have some type of a provision for being able to drop this off where it's going to be rehearsed with, and maybe have some adult help if it's needed, because we know that this one is just unbelievably heavy, and getting it around the school might be difficult for some of our second graders for the schools where we start that young. So let's go ahead and get it opened up. It's a really straightforward system. I've never seen a percussion case that worked differently. They all have zippers around the outside like this. And the pouch that we're going to open first is this very large pouch here. This one up here holds the snare drum, and we actually begin the school year on the xylophone, the little bell tree that's in here. Actually, it's more officially called the bell tree. And we'll be starting with that one, and so that's what we're going to start the video with today too. I will show you the snare drum, but we're just going to do that one second. All right, now that we're in the case, the first thing that you're going to need to find is this. This is the base of the stand, whether you're setting up the snare drum or the bell tree, and they're all going to look like this. It's all a tripod, and they all have a mechanism right here, a wing nut that you're going to very lightly loosen. Watch me one more time. I'm just doing it enough to loosen it so that I can move these legs. Sometimes you'll find that you have to kind of loosen this one and then loosen this one, and there we go. Okay, and you want to get it opened up nice and big like this. I'm going to set my case aside for just a moment and show you that we want to get a nice wide base with the tripod here, not all the way down like this. You saw actually the legs came back in together. Sometimes when you push this all the way down, it'll flatten out really wide. We don't want it like that, but we definitely don't want it choked up like this. I see a lot of students with theirs barely opened up like this, and the whole thing will totter over. So you do want to open these up so that this is about halfway down like this. And then this, since you only loosened it a little bit, it shouldn't need a lot of twisting to reset it. And it shouldn't need a ton of strength actually either. There's usually like some kind of a plastic or rubber mechanism in here that you're tightening against. And so even young student hands should be all right with tightening this to get the tripod. It's a good idea to give it just a little push to make sure that it's in place. The next thing that we're going to have to dig out of the case, this one's for the snare drum, we'll come back to that one, is this piece right here. They might be a little difficult to distinguish from one another. The one that is used for the bell tree has 4 rubberized arms on it. It's usually a little bit longer. It usually has this this screw protrusion at the top. The snare arms have only 3 rubberized arms. They're usually a lot bigger. It has a big joint right here that's very different. You'll get figured out pretty quickly what they are. And I must warn you in advance that this is not the only way that the bell tree can get set up. I'm going to tell you about a couple of the other ones, just in case yours isn't like this, but this is the most common one and the one that I'm able to borrow from the store to show you with. So, same mechanism as before. We've got a little wing nut here. We're going to loosen that, and you can see I'm having to pull on each of these 4 arms just to sort of get it started. And once I've got it started, now the whole thing is opening up like this. Now this one is great. It has a stopper when I get to the top. Once I've pulled it all the way up, loosen it a little more, make it easier on myself. I'll show you again. Once I get to the top with this one, there's a stopper. I can't open it anymore in that direction. Some of them are going to be able to keep going and almost close in this other direction. We certainly don't want that. Let me get a very good angle though of what this looks like when it's set up correctly. If you look really carefully, you can see actually that I have lifted it above, very slightly above what would be a flat plane. If I were to lower this down to an exactly flat plane like this, that's actually not the best way to set up the bell tree. You want to have it just the teensiest bit taller, and that's going to actually help cradle the bell tree better when you take this out and try to stabilize it up on here. That's a pretty specific ask for our students, and just know and be aware that they're not always going to get that just right. They're going to have it on here a little wrong. It might be teetering around a little and whatnot. We make a point of coming around through our classes to double check. We'll come over and give them a little gentle wiggle to see if they're stabilized correctly and whatnot, and we will help do any little adjustments that need to be done. But this is actually one of the main purposes of all these instrument tutorial videos, is helping get our percussionists set theirs up right, because you have by far the hardest setup. The only other instrument that compares even close is the clarinet, and yours is much harder, and we want to make sure that there's parent help in getting this set up, because it is quite complicated. So now we're just going to hand tighten this wing nut again. I think young hands should once again be just fine with this one, because they have a nice little rubberized or plasticized mechanism in there to help you out. It's not like you have to lock it in metal against metal. Okay, and now this pretty clearly goes in here like this. And let's talk about getting it to the right height. Okay, so the correct height to have this at is approximately belly button height. I am over 6 feet tall, and this is a student model instrument, and it won't go tall enough for me. So I'm actually going to be sitting in this chair to show you, and I want you to know that that's actually like a major no-no with percussion. We always play while standing up, and so you're going to have to imagine that a little bit in this video. I'm going to set up so that I'm at the tallest that I can be for this, or at a height that will work while I'm seated. But when you play, you're going to be standing up. Your rest position, you'll have a chair. You get to sit while I'm talking to the class. And then when it's time to stand up, when it's time to play, you're going to stand in front of your instrument and need to play. Okay? And I'll show you playing from standing and whatnot. But just know that as I'm showing you the height, what you want it set up is approximately belly button height. There's no perfect set here, and the students are going to figure out what's comfortable for them. So just know that that's around the correct height to set it at. And down here, there's one more wing nut that we have to tighten in order to lock this top one in place. If I were to loosen it, remember, this is the top joint, and then this is the base joint, and now we've made sure that they're nice and secure. Okay, great. We've got a pretty straightforward step for you here. We're going to remove the bell tree. 2 hands, please. This hole right here is going to end up lining up with the screw on the top of this. I want to show it to you while I have it down here upside down, that this is going to line up over there. Now, one of the hardest parts for our students is getting this correctly on to this. There's a very specific way that it goes on here. I'm going to get a really good angle and show you how to identify the correct place to get it set up. All right, now I have a view of this stand here for you. And the first thing to do, I think, while looking at this is identify the X. We want to have an X where the smallest part is at the very top of the X like this, that it's equal on the sides, that it's a little wider on the bottom, and that it's skinniest up on the top. And that is actually going to line up with the bell tree like this. The skinnier part of the bell tree, the smaller bars up here, are going to line up with the smaller part of the stand, and the wider part of the bell tree is going to line up with the wider part of the stand over here. Now, that's not the orientation that it'll be facing when you play it, but that is how this gets set on here. So the smaller end, of the bell tree down here is going to line up with the smaller part of the X. The wider part of the bell tree is on the bottom of the X, as it were. And then this sits in those four little arms with this hole on the back of the bell tree aligned with this screw right here. Some of you may be thinking, but Mr. Chris, mine doesn't have that at all. I've seen a lot of different mechanisms actually on the top of these to connect these bell trees. I saw one that's just a straight rod. I'll use this stick as an example. That's just a straight rod, and on the top it had a hexagon, and that hexagon was meant to slot in where this is here. There was a hexagonal slot that it's supposed to go into right here. And then there's another little wing nut that you use to tighten that up. I saw another one that has this weird kind of disc mechanism, and the disc slots in on the top of there's like a slot on the top of the rod, and it's weird. I won't bother trying to explain that all here, because if you have a different one like that, we're probably just going to need to have you experiment with it and figure it out, or we'll show you in class. We're going to help percussionists. All the percussionists are going to get extra help with this in the first couple classes. The sooner you can set it up on your own, the better, of course. But know that we're going to be jumping around and kind of prioritizing percussionists in getting set up, because this is the hardest one to get put together. Okay, now that I have the bell tree set up, it's actually going to be oriented towards me like this. I want to be facing this way when I play. I'm going to have my mallets facing in this direction while I play the instrument. So we get it oriented on the stand properly first, and then we set it up to play like this. Now I have some great news. Once you're done with this setup, you're in really good shape. Playing the instrument is really pretty easy, and almost all of these bell trees come with the note names printed on the bars themselves. So it's a really, really straightforward affair finding what notes you're supposed to play. In the very beginning of class, most students are going to be struggling to make any sound at all on their instruments. They've got to deal with bows pulling across strings. They've got to deal with blowing into a trumpet. It can be very, very, very challenging to get those first sounds on other instruments. And percussion is going to be over here going, no problem. And so we might actually be asking you to take your instrument apart and practice putting it together again on your own, since that's the difficult part for you at the very beginning. Know that that actually is kind of a normal thing to practice. Once you're getting pretty efficient at that, of course we want you playing with us as soon as possible. So let me show you the right way to be going about that in our first drills. The first thing that we need to cover is the proper mallet grip. These are the mallets that you're going to use on the bell tree. You should get two in your case. It's really straightforward holding on to these things properly, but it's actually very important that you get it just right. It's not like some of the others where we're going to wait a long time for this to kind of settle in and get perfected. We want this to get cleaned up as soon as possible on percussion, because the bad habits have a higher consequence early on. So the way that it's done is we're going to place the mallet in our first knuckle of our index finger. We're going to place our thumb on the opposite side of that, and we're going to gently wrap our fingers around the back of the mallet like this with a teensy bit left over. There should be a teensy bit left over, okay? And that is the correct grip on the mallet. When you go to play, you're going to be facing in at an angle like this. Sometimes we will tell the students to make a pizza, okay, because the mallets should sort of come in together like this. Most students are going to have a tendency to want to do this at first. They'll have their thumbs turned up and they'll want to try to play in this manner. I also see a very common problem of the index finger being extended out on the stick like this. This is a really bad habit that we want to get rid of immediately, and just have them hold the mallets properly like this. That's a really, really important one. When you go to strike the bars of the mallet, the stroke looks like this. I'm going to move it just a teensy bit so that you can see my wrists in action a little bit better. The motion is entirely from my wrist. I'm not moving my elbows at all. I'm not moving my shoulders at all. It is entirely from the wrist. And you'll notice that I actually begin the stroke very close to the bar, and I come up and down and back up. Okay? When we're playing basic sounds with the rest of the group, it's a great idea to be using both hands. It's a great idea to be playing notes together like this. It's a great idea to be alternating. When I'm playing this rhythm game at the beginning of class and going da, 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 any sound that comes out of the other instruments is great. What we might like to see percussion doing is alternating the sticks back and forth so that they get used to being a two-handed percussionist. Most right-handed percussionists play like this at first, and most left-handed percussionists play like this at first. And we really want to get both hands coordinated as soon as we can. As soon as we can. Bad habits can develop in a way on this instrument that then are really hard to kick later on. So obviously producing the sounds is easy as pie. You strike the bar, but getting the grip correct and trying to get the correct habits through this is really, really, really important. When we start playing the first notes, if you're using our method book, you'll be playing C, D, and E. If you're in a standard band book, you might be playing B flat, C, D, E flat, and F. The flat notes are marked up here as well. I'm not going to bother explaining any of that because it's literally written on the thing for you. That part of it you can't quite mess up, and that shouldn't be the difficult portion. The difficult portion of playing the right notes at the right time with us, I do want to take a moment to speak to you about though. So once we're through this phase of making our basic sounds and it's time to start reading music, this is where it suddenly becomes really hard for percussion again. It was hard putting it together. It was a total piece of cake playing the first few notes and making some sounds. And now it's suddenly going to get really hard again, because you have to read music that's out in front of you. Look at Mr. Chris or Mr. Corey or Mr. Ozzy or Mr. Mark or whoever is teaching the class, and you have to play the correct note. Look at the notes on your page. Look at the director over there, and then you have a third location to look as well. The other students will hopefully have their fingers resting in the correct place. Of course, they're going to have to look a little bit at the beginning too. It's not like they get off scot-free on that, but they get to rest their fingers in the correct place on their instrument, whatever it is. And if you move even an inch, you're now not in the correct place anymore. You're now over a different spot of the instrument. And so what percussionists are really budgeting during this phase is their eye time. How much are you really looking at the conductor? Hopefully not very much. We're not super important. You can hear us say, ready, go. And so don't look at us. You're going to want to look at your music, know the notes that you're supposed to be playing, and this is where hovering the sticks is so important. This is why we covered the basic stroke being starting like this, because if you're not hovering your sticks, then you're not going to stand a chance. You're going to be looking and going, and you have to pull it from up here and find where you're supposed to be. The notes are going to be clustered together. If you keep them close, you're going to stand a much better shot of being close to the ones you're supposed to be at and being able to maybe even play while looking forward like I just did. Okay? That's going to be the next tier for percussionists is budgeting their eye time and being able to hit the right note, read the music, and check in with the director every once in a while so that you know that you're in the right spot. So that really covers the fundamentals here on the Glockenspiel or bell tree. This, we want students to spend the first many weeks making sure that they understand how this works. We want to get a firm foundation on this before taking out the snare drum, because this is how you read notes. This is how you hear the correct pitches. This is a more complete set of musical skills that we really, really need you to develop, and more importantly than hitting the drum right away. Once this gets well established, we will start inviting students to start playing on their snare drum. Please know that we might invite some students to take out their snare drum a little earlier than others because they progressed to the point that they need to on this. We're not doing that punitively, of course. We're doing that encouragingly, like, hey, you're ready, and usually it's the next week that the rest of the percussionists are all ready. So it can be exactly the right incentive that we need when it's time to do that. In an ideal world, we just say, okay, everybody, we're going to try drums today, and then everybody's kind of on the same page. But in some rare cases, we will say, all right, I'd like you to try it today, and that kind of gets everybody else caught up and onto the same page. So, okay, let's talk about getting the snare drum set up correctly. All right, so everything about taking out the instrument and setting up the tripod bass is the exact same for the snare drum as it is for the bell tree, so I'm not redoing any of that information. We're going to take out the snare drum arm. You are much more likely to have the same device here, where the bell tree might vary a little bit. They should all be pretty much the same for the snare drum. I haven't encountered different versions of this. Which isn't to say that there aren't any, but hopefully we're all going to be able to see the same basic thing here. So this one has these 3 rubberized arms, and it has this shoulder joint here that we are going to loosen first. There is a tooth mechanism in there that you may have a little trouble. You might need to loosen it a little bit extra so that you're not grinding those little teeth against one another. Those are there to help stabilize it. The set that you're going to want to have with this is perfectly flat. You're going to want the snare drum to lie as close to perfectly flat as you can. So I'm setting this up in a way where when I open these up here and the snare drum sits on top of that, it's going to be pretty much flat. I don't want to have it at a severe angle like this or the other way. Your drummer may eventually have a preference for having their drum at a little bit of a tilt, and that's totally acceptable. But at the beginning, we're all going to just play it flat. That's the best way to do it, okay? Now I've tightened this wing nut. Those teeth that were in here have locked together, and it's ready to go. There's always going to be some kind of a spinning mechanism here. The spinning mechanism is for raising and lowering this. It sets up in the tripod just like the other one did, with the rod going in and the wing nut tightening. Removing your drum from the case, I don't think requires any explanation. You just take your drum out nice and gentle, and you get it set onto this here. Now, you might notice that the drum is not tightened in any way, shape, or form. And what I'm going to do before proceeding is I'm actually going to take the drum back off. I'm going to gently set it down back on top of the case over here. And I'm going to take this spinny device here, and I'm going to raise these arms. We want the drum to be nested on the rubber feet of each of these 3 points. So I'm going to get it set in there. Aha, that's a lot closer. You can see that this one is not there, but this one over here, it is. And the one that's closest to me, it is as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to leave the drum there. I'm going to make tiny micro adjustments so that I can get this right. And I'm going to start tightening those. I'm going to tighten and raise these so that every time I twist, what's happening is these are coming up higher and they're coming closer together and they're squeezing the drum. They're starting to hug the drum. And now I've just hand tightened it down here so that if I were to lift the drum, the whole stand comes up with it. It's really well secured in there. I haven't over tightened it. I'm not squeezing the life out of the thing, but it's tight enough that if I grab this, the whole stand would come along with it. It's really important that this is set up right because underneath down here, these are called the snares. This is what makes it a snare drum, and you want those to be free floating down here. You want them to have space. The drum head is going to vibrate when we play. If you watch, if you want to see something really cool, hop on YouTube and look at some slow motion videos of drum heads being used, and the amount that they wave back and forth is pretty unbelievable. We can't see it with the naked eye, but in slow motion, it's pretty amazing to watch percussion, cymbals, and drums be vibrating when they're really in action. And so we need the bottom of this drum to vibrate. We need it to vibrate down here and be free to do so, along with those snares. Before going any further, I'd like to talk to you about tightening the drum head. Tightening the drum head. When you first take these drums out of the case, they are going to be really, really, really loose. And when the drum head is too loose, you can't get the proper bounce to make drum rolls and other advanced drumming techniques. Somewhere in your case, you will have been given a drum key. It's going to look like this. It's usually in some kind of a pouch like this. It's just a little hand wrench. The drum key we're going to use to tighten the drum head. It's really important, especially with really young students, that they get parent or teacher help on this. This can cause permanent damage if it's done carelessly, so we want to be really, really careful with how we get it set up. Around the edge of the drum are all of these different rods. You can see they have a screw mechanism down here. We're going to be tightening them using this hand wrench. Okay? There's a good procedure to use with this, and it's really important that you don't just crank away on the thing really, really carelessly, because again, you can cause permanent damage. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the hand wrench on one of these, and we're going to give it, I think, probably a half turn. I'm going to go 180 degrees. Now this drum, we tightened it for our instrument demonstration days so that it was working properly for our students. So I could tell as I was turning that, there was a lot of resistance. Not so much that I couldn't turn it, of course, but it was enough that I don't think I'll do 180 degrees again on this particular drum. I'd probably have to do it like 5 more times to create real damage. Please don't panic and freak out about damaging your drum. You're very unlikely to do so. But I also exercise some caution. Don't just crank away carelessly on the thing. Now, I am not going to go to this one or to this one. I'm going to go all the way directly across the drum. All the way directly across the drum. I'll change the focus so that it'll come back over towards me over here. On the exact opposite. We did this one, now I'm doing this one. I did 180 degrees, so I would do 180 degrees over here. Knowing that the drum is a little tight, I'm just gonna go maybe like a quarter turn here. That's gonna do. And now, I am gonna go back, and I'll change the focus again here for you. Not obviously to the one that I already did, but now I'll go to this one, let's say. Quarter turn. Across the drum, quarter turn. Back over here, quarter turn. All the way exactly across the drum, quarter turn. Once you've gone all the way across, when you come back, you just proceed clockwise is usually the easiest way to keep track of it. We'll quarter turn here, and then back across over to here, which I have not yet done. Quarter turn, and you can see I'm next to the one that I started on over here. Okay. Now, with your drums freshly out of your cases, it's 100% that you will need more than a quarter turn. You will start with 180. It's going to be a little hard to tell because, unless you're a percussionist, you might not be able to tell what's going to be tight enough. The way that you really tell is by the feel of the drum. It's really great to have a nice tight drum head where we can get that beautiful bounce of the stick. Okay, it's very, very. If you were to make your hand into an exact fulcrum, which we're going to talk about in just a second for proper drumming technique, what should end up happening is something maybe akin to this. That's when the drum is tight enough. If it's just going and it can't actually bounce enough, then you probably need to tighten it a little bit more. We're going to tend to them a little bit in class as well, but to any extent, especially when we have lots of percussionists in a class, it can be a few weeks before we can get all the drums done because there's enough work that goes into tightening the drum heads that it's just a lot for one teacher to get to in each program. So if we get parent recruitment on tightening the drum heads before they get taken out to be played in class, huge, 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 huge help, and many thanks for that. Let's talk about actually playing this thing. So, where I was not able to get the bell tree at the proper height for me to be able to play it standing, the snare drum I actually am able to get high enough out of this kit. It just comes from the literal height of the snare drum itself, the height of the mechanism to hold it, and then of course the tripod itself adds up to enough that I might like it a teensy bit higher if I was being real picky, but this is absolutely more than acceptable. Now, I have to also get the drum placed the correct distance from me as well. And you don't want to be right up next to your drum when you're playing. You want to have a little bit of space between you and it. And I'll show you how we're going to hold the sticks properly next. So holding the stick properly is often assisted by the logos that are placed on these sticks. With this Vic Firth brand, this American flag is about where you want to target holding on to the stick and using it as your fulcrum. You are literally setting up a fulcrum that is going to be a balance point, right? You can look the way that my excellent percussionist roommate in college taught me was to find the balance point and then come behind it. Find the balance point on the stick and then come behind it so that there is more weight headed up towards the tip like this. We don't want to be so that the weight is back here, and we don't want to be exactly on the balance point. We want to be where there's weight in that direction. So again, on these, they got a nice little spot for you to grab, basically. And you want a little bit of excess stick hanging out the back. That's going to help us actually be in control of the whole system here. It would not be correct to be holding it like this. That you're going to find is a little bit too difficult to control, and there's too much weight out this way. You can't get the right types of bounces that you want to get out of that. So now, the way that we want to get it set into our hand correctly is we want to have the stick on the first knuckle, just exactly like we did when we were talking about the mallets before. The thumb goes on the opposite side of that. The fingers very, very, very gently wrap around the back like this. And that is the proper grip. Same exact thing with the other hand. First knuckle, thumb, gently around the back. And when we set up to play the drum, it's going to look basically like this. Okay, now that we have the grip set up properly, I want to show you the way that we're going to be oriented on this drum. Okay? Our arms are going to be set. We're going to be floating our sticks over about this part of the drum right here. I'm set up in a position where it's around belly button height. It's maybe just a little bit lower than that, so my sticks are pointed down towards the drum just a little bit, and my sticks are floating off center, not in the center, not in the dead center. You could be over here off center, but now you're farther away from your drum. You can stand in like this and be playing kind of across the center. This is the area that you want to be aiming for over here. You're going to notice, hopefully, that my wrists are pretty flat. Let me change our angle for a brief moment. My angle of attack against this drum is like this. My angle of attack against this drum is like this. My wrists are quite flat as I head to play. Okay? You'll notice that when I strike the drum, I'm just flicking my wrist, really. My elbow isn't going. My shoulder isn't going. Okay? It's just from here. I'm not death gripping, white knuckling the sticks at all. I have a nice loose grip on it. And really, what would be one of the best things we can get the students to practice at the very beginning is to get their sticks to go like this. We're giving it that nice gentle bounce. And as we wrap these fingers around the back and apply the tiniest bit of pressure with these fingers, we're not grabbing on. That would stop the stick from bouncing. We can't just choke the stick and stop it from bouncing. But when we apply the tiniest bit of pressure, what that does is it tightens and speeds the bounce. Try it with no fingers. Try it with fingers touching. Now apply the teensiest bit of pressure with the back fingers. Every little bit more pressure that you apply, you're speeding up that bounce. Can you get 2 clean strokes? Da-da. That would be great if you can be in control of the stick, that you can get exactly 2. And now I can embarrass myself and show you that I'm not really a percussionist and try to do it with my left hand. I got one. Okay. But this is going to take a really, really long time. It's not something that we expect our percussionists to be able to do right away. It's something that we're working towards. And even the best percussionists on earth are trying to clean up their bounce and trying to make it even more efficient and all kinds of other stuff. But that's really what we want them starting to hone in on now, is getting that bounce going and really properly getting these fingers around the back of the sticks in a way that they're in control and that they can get working towards a drum roll. So much of other drumming technique comes from the same delicacy in the back fingers here and actually being in control of the stick and not just walking up. You're going to see the students walking up with this kind of a grip. Their thumbs are extended and they're just going bam, 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 bam. They're starting from up here. They're lifting their shoulders and elbows, and it's all very exciting. And we see a lot of parents say, oh, well, I think my kid is like a natural drummer. They just like hitting stuff, all right? It's fun to do that, and it's just that in drumming. And so when it comes to this, what we're trying to do is really refine the technique on the hands and the sticks, and then all the extra stuff kind of falls out very nice and neat from there. By the time that your student is starting on the drum, they've already had at least many weeks in class. They know how class works. They're probably better at building their instrument. They've already been reading a significant amount of notes on their bell tree. And when it comes to this, their note reading is quite a lot simpler. It's all on one line because we can't change pitches. We can't go do, re, mi. All we can do is whatever one pitch the drum happens to be tuned to. And so they're going to have to learn other symbols that show complicated rhythms and complicated drumming techniques. It's not like there's nothing to learn about reading here, but hopefully we have already established all of those skills at least reasonably well on the other instrument. And when we come to this one, it's really about the physical technique of how you're holding the sticks and how you're operating the drum itself. And if we have that balanced correctly, then we can get a very quick jump into the drum and switch back over to the bell tree, make sure we don't forget it all, and we can start going maybe every other week. We do the drum, we do the bell tree, we do the drum, we do the bell tree, and then it can get even more complicated from there. We can start adding in other instruments that we just stock there right at the school, like a big bass drum or some crash cymbals or some other fun percussion stuff. And that can be very exciting. You know, you're going to learn all the basic techniques on these two instruments that we ask you to rent in this kit, and then schools or orchestras or bands or wherever else you might be playing are going to stock the rest of it. Okay, there's one last bit that I do want to show you about, and that's about engaging and adjusting the snare on the snare drum. On the side of your snare drum, you'll see there's nothing particularly exciting. This over here is where the snares are attached on this side of the drum. And then this right here on this drum has a dial. Tightening and loosening this is going to push this dark circle right here up against the drum or pull it away from the drum head. You want to be careful about cranking too hard on this thing here. When you are putting pressure on the drum head, that just means that the drum head isn't going to be able to vibrate as much. It's going to change the tone and pitch a little bit. It's going to dampen it a little bit when you have it going up, and when you have it going down, that might make it a little louder. It might undampen it a little bit. It really kind of depends on how much pressure is already being put there. You'll find that it's actually relatively sensitive once you get really good at listening carefully to the different types of sound that it can make. So this will change the sound quality. And then this right here is called the snare mechanism. And it has some kind of a lever which can engage and disengage the snares. The snares are these combs on the bottom, and when the rattles, and when this mechanism is engaged, you should hear that classic snare drum sound. And when it's disengaged, you're going to hear more of what we would call the sound of a tom. When your student is practicing at home, having this engaged or disengaged isn't going to change anything about the technique of how it's played. It's going to change how loud it is. It's a tone quality thing. And so it's probably pretty important that you let your kid jam with the snares attached sometimes, because that's super fun and part of the point of having this instrument. But this is going to make it a lot softer. Another way that you can deaden practice is to take a tea towel or a microfiber rag and place it on the drum. And so if you need to deaden the drum a little bit more, put a rag on it. It's still bouncing the same as it was before, or at least very close to the same. You can use a bigger towel, you can use a heavier towel. Most of these kits will include a drum pad in them as well. Screws into your stand, and you don't have to worry about tightening or loosening this. It's a different type of mechanism. This practice pad can be placed on a table too. It usually has like a rubberized, this one actually doesn't, I'm surprised, but usually there's some kind of a rubberized bottom on here so that placing it on a table means it's not going to get scratched. But as long as you're careful about what surface you choose, you can get a lot softer practice in on this as well. If you live in a setting where it would be totally inappropriate to be practicing on the drum very much at home. Okay, my friends, well, that's basically all there is to it with percussion. The long-term maintenance of this is don't knock it around too hard. Don't bang the thing up. Take good care of it. Be gentle. Always be treating it with the utmost care, and be sensible about where you leave it out and when you put it away and who you let touch it and that kind of stuff. Any other things that could come up, drums after a very, very, very long time, you can decide that it's time that the drum head has been beat up too much and it needs to get changed over. If you're a student, rents this kit all the way into high school and practices on the drum at home, you'll probably need to do a drum head replacement, but that's not that major of a thing. This top ring comes off, a new drum head goes on, and you tighten it down. You know, you might end up, if your percussionist gets really serious, they'll have a huge collection of sticks. They'll have light sticks and heavy sticks and, you know, all kinds of different. They'll want to try some of the new fiberglass and plastic ones. Same thing with mallets. You may have noticed that I was using really like rubberized mallets. These ones that come in the kit here, these are really rubberized. These are actually plastic. They would have a much louder ding to them, and so you might collect different mallets and such, but that doesn't have anything to do with maintaining the instrument. It has to do with, you know, collect more collector's items. What you have in the case is what you need, and as long as it doesn't get beat up, then that's all there is to it. Okay, well, that's about it for percussion. Thank you so much for hanging out for the entire video. If you have any questions or feedback about things that we should include in a future version of this video, we would really appreciate hearing that. Good luck with everything, and we really look forward to seeing you in class. Take care now. Bye-bye.